So let's go ahead with the coding standards. So we'll be using the flower box is used. So we'll be using the flower boxes, and we'll see. I mean, like, normally wherever there is comments, okay. So it's always good to have comments. We always need to maintain the comments, and we know that if you have to start the line with a comment, then you have to start with the star. And if it is in the between in middle of the line, we have to use the inverted quotes. So this is something which we need to write, and we need to always make sure that we write the code, write the text or the information wherever it is possible. So wherever it is possible, we have to make sure that we write we write the comments. So if let's say we have a program here, so in this program we have to make sure that we write here it's like start of declaration, startup declaration, so something like that. So in the program, on the top of the program also, we should write the coding naming convention. So I've already mentioned that in the previous document I have shared it with you. Anyways, like we'll go ahead with this main top 60 coding standards that we have, the best practices. Program header updated with reference to FSD and TSD. See, whatever is the program header, we need to make sure we write the descriptions cannot be something which as you like. So whatever is the functional specification document, technical specification document heading, so that heading should be updated in the header of the program. So here in the header of the program, in the sense here, let me go to a program. So here this is a header. Here this is a header. Okay, so here we can write something like, this is the header of program. This is the header of program. So here what we'll write is, we'll write title. We'll write title, and we'll write a program, a report program to display something. Okay, so whatever is the now program to display something which you're writing, or program to create screens or something like that. So whatever you are writing here, whatever title we are writing here, that we need to make sure that it is exactly the same as the FSD and TSD. This is what is the second point. Okay, so the third point is type verb is used while declaring the fields whenever feasible. So what you need to do is, you need to first declare everything in the types, and then later we need to assign the data. So instead of directly going for the data. Okay, so what do I mean by that is, so what do I mean by this? That is, if types is there, we are basically declaring everything in types, and then we are declaring the data. So this is how it is. So as I told you, in the old way of declaring the program, we used to have something like the internal table used to be directly declared with data. That is something which is not recommended here. So that is not something which we have to do it here. Okay, so we have to use, as much as possible we have to use a in types declaration instead of data. So we had the internal table, right? So internal table declaration, yes, this one. So we used to declare internal table directly in the data. That should be avoided here. That's what we are talking about in this naming the coding standards. Then we have to have include programs is used. So wherever it is possible, we have to use include programs. If you see the standard programs, most of the declaration part will be in the include programs only. In even in the standard programs, even in the project implementation, in most of the projects, they will suggest us to go for this entire declaration part to be kept in the include programs. In fact, there will be some projects in which they want us to keep everything whichever is possible to keep it in the include programs. So, and then even the entire code has to be written in perform statements. We have to write the forms below, and then we have to write it. So most of the code, the entire code will be something like this. So let me copy this and explain you. either it should be in include programs or it should be in the forms. So in some insist you to go ahead uh, with the include programs. In some they will go for forms. Let us assume that we have to have a forms. So how do we declare the forms? Is like this entire field catalogs are there. Entire field catalogs we are going to write it in one form statement. Perform fcats, okay, means field catalogs. Double click on it and it gets created below in forms, and at the bottom you will write the entire program in this particular subroutine. And then we'll go back and this will be like the select statement will be again in another perform statement. So this is one perform, then we have another perform select, and double click on it, it gets created down, in which we have select statement, and back have this call function. So this entire call function will be in another select statement. Now here we write perform ALV. So we'll double click on this, say yes, the main program, say okay, and in this we'll go ahead with that. So this is what we have. Once it's been done, we'll just save and activate. So once it's active you can execute. So it's like normal thing. So wherever it is possible we'll be using either perform statements or we'll use the include statements. This is something which is not mandatory, but in some projects it will be made mandatory. So you have to make sure we according to the project we follow that. And then we have to use the pretty printer. Pretty printer just now we have discussed, right? So we just have to use the pretty printer. So when we use pretty printer it will automatically change everything into according to the coding standards. So according to the coding standards, if in the project they say that all the standard code should be in capital letters, and this user defined fields or variables should be in lowercase letters, then if you click on this pretty printer it will turn it off. But we have to activate this. First we need to activate it and click on pretty printer. So pretty printer is executed. So I think everything is in capital letters. So we'll go for utilities settings, and here in the pretty printer we'll change that option to uh, user keywords uppercase. Okay, keywords uppercase, and then we'll click on this pretty printer. Automatically everything else will become lowercase. Only the system defined fields should be in a will be automatically in capital letters. So this is what we have. Activate. So once it's been done, this is done, we can execute this. So this is the point which we have here. Pretty printer have to be used, and custom transaction codes have an authorization check implemented. See, by default SAP basis team will give you the authorization groups. There will be authorization groups which will be prepared for each department. For example, finance department will have a separate authorization group. A sales department will have a separate authorization group. Every department will have its own authorization group, but we technical people will have a separate authorization group for ABAP. So that authorization group, if it is assigned, then we'll be able to use all the transaction codes which we are using for programming. but the end users will have a separate authorization codes in which they will be given some fee, some transaction codes. Only those transaction codes they'll be able to open. Rest of things they'll not be able to open. So authorization checks can be maintained here. Authorization checks are maintained by the basis people, but when we are creating a transaction code, you need to make sure you are maintaining the you are maintaining the authorization checks. So let's say we have ZDXC1234 and click on create. So here there will be an option called authorization check. Here there will be something called authorization check. So after giving the program name and screen number, so you have to give the authorization check. By default there will be some authorization checks given by SAP, but we as a we in the project will be assigning some authorization checks which we need to create here. So once it's been done, we can assume that we have maintained the authorization checks. So whenever we are creating a transaction code, we need to make sure that we have the authorization checks there. So this is what we have. And next thing is we have a program assigned to a transaction code. So it's a good practice to maintain a transaction code for all the programs that we have created wherever it is possible. And comments are used properly. So there should be subheadings and comments. Comments should be very clear, guys. So that like anybody who doesn't know anything, they should be able to understand that. And we should remove the dead code. What do we mean by dead code is? Dead code is like, as I told you, we are declaring something and we are not using it. So if we are declaring something and we are not using it, that is called dead code. That dead code have to be removed. Menu text are in proper cases. So menu text, it should not be in a haphazard way. So they should be in a proper way. So menu text have to be maintained properly. All the texts, it's not just menu text, selection texts, and field text, everything have to be maintained properly. Then we have select field names is instead of, okay, we always have to use select field names instead of select star, because we all know that select star should not be used because it will select all the fields and it will affect the performance. And work area should be always cleared. See, remember when we have used a program for internal table, so we said once we appended the data into the internal table, we cleared the work area, because it's always good practice to clear the work area. I also showed you the disadvantages of not clearing the work area. What happens here is, if you have not appended, if you're not modified the, if I've just used the modify command at the time, and when I am not appending some value, I'm not entering the value into the work area, by default the old value was getting updated. So there will be some issues when you don't clear the work area. Whenever the work of the work area is done, it's always good practice to clear the work area. This is a very important thing you have to remember. Select into table is used to populate the internal table. So we should not use select and select. In select and select, what happens, we will enter the data into work area. So for each and every record in the select and end select, if for each and every record, it will go to the database table, guys, database tab. So it will be a huge load on the database server. Of course, in the HANA database, it will not be a problem because the database is extremely powerful. But in general, this is something which we always follow in the ABAP. So loop, in the loop, where used instead of using loop and then check. So in loop statements, I'll just show you this. In the loop statements, instead of a where statement, instead of conditions again inside the loop, we can write loop. In loop itself, we can write from and to. Okay, so this one I'll show you. So I'll show you this. So internal table is sorted before using the binary search. If at all, if you have to use the binary search, you have to make sure the internal table is sorted. So you know how to sort it. Sort it underscore emp by empno, something like that. So we'll be doing that, and we can sort it based on ascending and descending. We have discussed that, right? Okay, so append lines to in itab into itab 1 into itab instead of using append itab 1 to itab 2. So what exactly happens here is, like, instead of direct, see, we can append directly from internal table to internal table, guys. Instead of appending from internal table to internal table, each field have to be assigned. Just like in the screen values, you have assigned to assign each and every value to work area and then append the internal table, right? So our database table, you have done it directly for database table. So instead of going for internal table to internal table, we have to go from value to value, field to field. So report columns are aligned correctly. So there those needs to be aligned correctly. Report columns. So report columns means this one. So everything is properly assigned. So these are properly aligned, and everything is properly aligned in the code. I'm talking about the code. Okay. And then we have appropriate messages is used to display messages. See guys, like if at all, if we are using select statement in the real time, if you are using select statement, it is damn sure that you have to select the size of rc. Okay, if size of rc is equals to 0, then you should not have any error. Otherwise, it's a coding standard. It's a normal general practice that wherever you're writing select statement, you have to check if it is successful or not successful. If select statement is not successful, definitely you have to populate the message. It's mandatory. Just like it's mandatory for us to give the select options, right? See, there was no program in which I have not written select options. Everywhere I have written select options, guys. So you can use select options. Instead of that, you can also use parameters as well. But I've used it's a practice that we have to use at least single select option, even if the client is not specifying it. Normally we do it. So here in the after the select statement, we have to write the size of rc. If size of rc is equal to 0, select statement is successful. If size of rc is not equal to 0, then it is not successful. So something like this. Okay. So these kind of messages we always have to give. This is the very important. So we need to check the status of the code, and then we need to write this message. This is very important. Okay. And appropriate messages is used to be have to be displayed wherever it is required. Text symbols are used instead of hard codes. So text symbols are very very important, guys. Like instead of writing something, if you want to write something before this, let's say we want to write before this select statement, we want to write this is material storage data, something like that. If you want to type this, instead of typing like this, what you need to do is you are not supposed to write it like this. You're supposed to write it like write text text hyphen 001, and then you have to double click on this, and inside this you have to write that. Inside this text you have to write this. Okay, this is material storage. Okay, this is the right way of doing it. Material storage. So you should not write it directly. And there are advantages for this, many advantages. So we can fix the maximum value, maximum length, how much length we have, because we have seen the advantage of going for text one when we are using the headings in the normal classical report, right? So there we fixed up the exact length of the heading, how much we want. We have fixed it up. Okay, so there are many advantages. You can use this write text 001 any number of times in any number of places in the within the program. So this is something we always have to make sure. Text is not written directly. We have to make use of this text elements, text symbols. SLIN check is completed. So this syntax check, I'll show you this syntax check. What is this SLIN check? I'll show you. So syntax check we already know. So Control F2, and program checked through code inspector. So just like we have extended program check and all these things, so we have to also go for the code inspector. Unused tables from table statement should be removed. Unused variables should be removed. Unused text elements should be removed. Code statements which do not do nothing are removed. Okay, code statements, if there is a line which is of no use, then you have to remove this. Commented our parts of codes. Unit test is completed. Unit test have to be completed. Program test text with reference to FSD is completed. following naming conventions. So what is FSD? Functional specification document, right? It's a document. In you, with seeing that document only, you will understand what exactly you have to do. Is it a report? Is it a smart form? Is it a code or something like that? This is what we have. Naming conventions. So followed the naming conventions. Naming conventions is very important, guys. It's like, as of now it's okay, whatever I'm writing WA, you are writing W, or I'm writing I and IT underscore KN1, and you are writing is just like I just I underscore something like that. Anything is okay today when we're practicing, but naming conventions for everything is extremely important in the program. If you're not following the naming conventions also, it might not be passed through the testing phase. Okay, it will fail the testing phase. Okay. Headers should be used for include programs. Headers are mandatory for include programs. We have to write it very clearly what should be the um, heading. And selection screen fields should be validated at selection screen. So whatever selection screen fields we are giving, we have to validate it at selection screen whether the data is there or not. We have used select single statement to validate it. Case statement should be used in place of if, where a single field is checked for more than two values. If let's say case statement should be used, if let's say there is a field, guys, on a single field, if you are checking all the options, then you go for case. If you have the check on multiple fields, then you have to go for if. Okay, so only required columns used instead of using select star. Only required columns are used instead of select star. So required, we have already always used that. We have always used only couple of fields instead of select star. An internal table should be sorted before you doing a binary search. We already discussed that. When appending itab to itab2, we should always use instead of itab to itab, we have to use field to field. Okay, appropriate messages should be used for displaying errors. The events that appear in the program should be in the order in which they are generally executed. Means you have, what is the order? Initialization, at selection screen, startup selection, end of selection, top of page, end of page. They should be in same order, guys. Like let me tell you, even if you write in a different order, it will work fine. Even if we write initialization at the end, top up page at the top, or select startup selection at somewhere in the middle, anywhere you write the event, it will be executed according to the procedure that we have. So wherever you write, initialization will be executed first, something like that. Okay, so all the texts and or messages created in the text ID only instead of hard coding. So we should always make sure that we are writing in the text IDs instead of hard coding the value text. All components being saved under the same transport request name. This is very very important, guys. See, what are all the components? What do we mean by components? See, if you create a database table, the domains and data elements happen to be the components. Okay, it's not that you have one program, you are doing two programs, one for material master, another for sales. Those two, even though you are doing it, they are not considered as same components. They are different individual objects, but components means what? Domains and data elements are the components of database table. You understand that, right? So all these things should be kept purposefully. They have to be kept in one transport request only. What happens if you keep them in the different transport request is, if one is transported, another is not transported. For example, domains are not transported, database table is transported, then domain definition is not there in the quality server, then it will fail in the quality server. They will work fine in database server, development server, but in the quality server it will fail. So you have to make sure all the components are on the same request number. It's very very important, guys. Never use exit commands in user exits, that I'll tell you. So user field symbol instead of work area. So instead of work area, we can use field symbols, because field symbols will entertain the length of the field according to the size of that work area. So I will explain you this later by example. So never use commit or rollback in bad implementations. This also I'll explain you. Using naming conventions, using naming standards for every SAP objects. Naming conventions have to be followed. And SLIN syntax, I'll just tell you that. Use pretty printer, we already saw. So make flowchart diagram. So if you before doing the program, it's always good to do the flowchart diagram and get the approval of your of the reporting person to whom you are reporting. So if you get the flowchart, you will get a very good clarity of what to do first, what to do next, and all these things. Flowchart is very extremely important, guys. It's very good to follow the flowchart. So in the flowchart, what happens? Okay, I have done this. Next step, what you have to do? Next step, what you have to do? It will be easy for us. Okay, never use hard coding. Use always standard messages class or text elements. Don't mail any confidential things to your personal email IDs. That's something which is very crucial because they'll track it. Always check your code before sending it to the reviewer. So make sure you double check before sending it to the reviewer, because reviewer will check it and find the mistakes and highlight them and keep everyone in CC and then send it to you. So programming start with Z, or so program should start with Z, guys. See, Y, as I told you, it can be used for with Y or Z. So some people, what they did was like, just because Y also can be acceptable, for a change they will use Y. No, you should not use Y, because according to the coding standards, what the implementation project have plan is, in most of the projects, they will plan all the testing fields or testing programs. They will start with Y. Okay, so that's the reason you, if they want you to start with Z, you have to always start with Z only, not with Y. So variable starting with G underscore for global variables. I will explain you that. Subroutine starting with ZF underscore, if at all, if you are using, I mean, like in a particular project, whatever is the subroutine syntax that you have to follow. Select options, whether make sure it is S underscore or SO underscore, whatever it might be. Transaction codes, variants, these all things have to be followed according to the naming conventions. There's a big list for naming conventions which we have discussed, right? So all those things have to be satisfied, guys. So use header and comment lines. It's mandatory. Use all includes, and use flower box in the top of program. So there are some coding standards which might be repeated twice. So just ignore them, guys. So these are the major coding standards which we have to follow when we are doing the when we are writing the programs. Okay, and so there was an coding in the coding standards, whatever is there. So each program will have, each project will have its own coding standard. So you have to observe carefully what should be the coding standards, what should be the naming conventions we have to follow. Okay, let's say if you are creating an ad hoc, it should start with Z text for representative. So I have seen when I'm doing the code review in the standard, I mean, like in the projects, I've seen a lot of guys, right? They do a mistake here. After Z they will keep underscore. In most of the projects I have seen this. So at least there will be one or two guys who will actually keep after Z underscore. See, underscore is not there here in the coding standards. Do you see any underscore here? No. Here you see underscore. Okay, here you see underscore. So when underscore is not expected here, you should not write this. What is that? You have to start Z and application area. What is the application area? It will be there in the top. Okay, it will be here. The application area is in the top. Let me show you that. So that becomes an error, guys. Like, it's not an error actually. It becomes something which cannot be approved. Again, they might send back. See, what is the application area? Is mm. So if, let's say, you are writing a program for mm. Okay, we are writing it to m for mm. So what people write, instead of writing, so what is expected out of you? It is expected that you will write the naming convention of the program, something like this: Z Z mm underscore, write something. Okay, whatever you want to write, you write it. That's a different thing. But what most of the people do is Z underscore mm underscore. This becomes again this becomes a unacceptable thing. They'll send it back. Okay, so those kind of things are very silly, but it happens in projects. Okay, and as I showed you, why also, why is actually syntactically it's correct, guys, but throughout the naming conventions, when they are saying use Z, and when you are using Y, it will not be approved. Okay, so this naming. So instead of going through the entire 25 pages, I'll have it as, normally in most of program projects we'll be having it 20 to 40 pages of naming conventions will be there, guys. Like, if you have a patience to go through that, you can go through that. Otherwise, what you can do is you can simply go through the programs which are already done in the past. Okay, just check out the programs which are there in the past, and then see, you can see all the naming conventions in one place. What is, how the select options are being declared, select statement, and internal table, work area, structures, variables, constants. What are the naming conventions? You can get all the naming conventions in one program, if at all you can find out but make sure it is already approved by your approver. If you are copying the naming conventions from something which is not approved, again your program also will not be approved. So these all things have to be carefully, guys. And one more, see, this is how the header looks like. Okay, this is how the header should look like. Okay, in the top of the program you have to write something like this. So this also is a naming convention. This will be done by given by the given in the naming conventions list or document. There'll be a document which they'll give it to you. So in this, on the top of the program you have to copy this will be in entire comments. Okay, everything will be in comments. Everything will be in comments. Okay, let me show you for the same thing. So in this we can go ahead with on the top. So we can remove this. Okay, this is all not mandatory. So we'll just copy this, and here you should give the naming, I mean like name of the author. Okay, you'll be giving your name, developer user ID. So if you in some projects they want your name, in some projects they need your username. So, and then we have to go for the date, transaction code. If attached, you have to mention the transaction code, which transaction code we have to run for using it. Technical design and description. This description was what I was telling you guys. This description should be exactly the same as the title of the functional specification document. Okay, so that should be, and request number also will be mentioning here. So what is the transport number? Here it will be like modification information. So if at all, if somebody is modifying, then you have to write it down. Okay, here we have to give the transport request also. Transport request, here transport request number which you have initiated first. So all these information, in some companies they'll have 10 to 20 lines of information on the top. So it depends on the project to project and client to client. You have to follow all these instructions very very carefully, perfectly. Okay, so these are the coding standards that we have to follow, guys. And never ever write this no nested loops. Loop at, if you're writing an end loop, inside loop you again should not use a loop. This is a these are the common coding standards that we have to follow. Inside a loop you should not write a loop. Inside a loop you should not write if statement. Inside an if statement again you should not write in end if is there. And then again inside this again you should not write if and if, because this becomes a nested loop. So in a nested loops will rotate multiple number of times. If let's say we have 100 records, 100 into 100, 10,000 times it will be rotating. So that should not happen. So to avoid that, nested loops should be avoided always. Okay, and select star should be avoided. Select star should be avoided, and select end select should be avoided. Select end select, we never use that actually in our programs, because it has become completely obsolete in the normal programming. So select and select we should avoid, and we should always make sure that we have the select options, or at least one select option, or at least one parameter have to be there. So we have to make sure we always have a structure declared, and after the structure is declared we have to go for ITAB, internal table declaration. So these all things are the very standard normal things that we have to follow for every program, guys. So these are certain things that you have to remember, and if there are few more things, I'll be explaining you in the coming sessions. Whenever the project, inside the project, whenever we come across it, I'll highlight that. Okay, and never forget to, after select statement, never forget to write the size of RC. You have to check the size of RC value. That is also very important, guys.